So, welcome to Collective Conversations, a series of conversations hosted by the Student Collective around health aspects of your life to evaluate in ministry. These conversations are inspired by a talk given by Kevin Shepherd at Time Out at our pastor's retreat this past February. And so, if you haven't heard that talk yet, I highly recommend pausing this conversation and going back and taking a look at that conversation because Kevin outlined 7 areas of our life that we need to evaluate. And so this is our first conversation, and I'm so excited to welcome my friend Rick Boys with us. If you're unfamiliar, my name is Wayne Giroux. I serve as the Student Ministries Director for the Student Collective, and this is my friend Rick Boys. Now, Rick has been the lead pastor of Gateway Church in London and Komoka for over 20 years. He has served within the WOD as a section pastor and a DE member. Rick is originally from Meaford, Ontario, but don't let his humble roots fool you. He is a visionary who often sees and interprets how to lead forward in ways that others aspire to. As a lifelong fan of coaching, he brings perspective and depth to any decision-making process. Rick and his wife, Cheryl, have 2 married children and live in London, Ontario. And while his greatest source of pride is his grandson, Porter, a close second is the fact that he is indeed my pastor and has been for over 15 years. And so welcome, Rick. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Oh, great to be with you. Great.
Thank you for...
I didn't realize it's been 15 years.
It has, yes. Well, my daughter's 12. And so you were... we came to Gateway before that, and then we're still here, and so it's been a good long time. So fantastic. It makes me feel old when we talk about numbers like that, but it's okay. It's good. Rick, I've had the privilege of hearing you preach and talk about finances for over 15 years, as I mentioned. How does this topic hit home for you?
Well, it's really interesting when you say that, Wayne. Every minister, as they mature and move on in their ministry experiences, there's always areas that they'll gravitate towards, either theology or practical. Some are known for marriage or kids, or some are known for, a variety of things. And somehow finances has been one of the foundational stones. It's kind of the underbed of what I do. And quite often when I am asked to speak, or even on our pastoral preaching team, when we talk about it, they'll go, well, the boss is the one who handles the money because that's kind of his thing. So it kind of has become my thing. And I when I think about that, all I can go back to is my upbringing. When when I was a kid, my dad taught me how to handle finances from an early age, like 12 and 13 years old. My dad, he got me a couple of lawnmowers, and I started a lawnmower business, and he would make me record, the cost of the lawnmowers and how much gas and how much oil and how much fuel per lawn, and then break it down and price it all out, and then mark it up accordingly so that I made a good amount of money on per lawn that I was doing and how many times I was doing it. And then once I collected the invoice of the monies that I would make, then, so much was tithe, so much had to go to savings, so much I could enjoy, so much had to go towards other expenses. And so that whole process was kind of ingrained in me at a pretty young age. And I guess it's just kind of carried forward.
And not just in your personal life, like you've had the opportunity to lead some pretty big corporate, building plans, and you navigated the moving of Gateway Church from its old location to its new location and building and all of those kinds of things. It's some pretty big financial things you've looked after.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you say that. So where did that come from? When I first started as a volunteer pastor at UGT, or what is now called Parkwood, when George Carroll was relocating UGT and building Parkwood Gospel Temple, and if you've been to Windsor and seen all of that, it was in those early years that I had an affinity towards that. And I asked Pastor George if I could sit in. I said, I won't say nothing. I'll just stand in the corner, but can I watch to see how you do it? And so I was privileged to go to meetings with architects, city planners. I was able to go with him when he would talk to banks about financing, and even in the board when they made their decisions. to build. I was witness to a lot of those things. So whether it be personal finances or whether it be more corporate or organizational finances, I've been privileged to see some of those things, so that when I was invited to come to London to relocate what was at that time Glad Tidings Assembly, try to find a piece of land, develop that piece of land, in other words, put the services in, and then design a building, and then actually build it. And then, of course, we had a couple of phases where for many people that would be staggeringly fearful. For me, it was actually exciting. It was something I really wanted to do. And so, yeah, it's been kind of my thing over the years, I guess.
And just for those who may not understand, we're not talking about a $100,000 renovation. Like, we're talking multi-million dollar. Yeah. Which
we're into multiple millions of dollars. The first phase was 5.5 million. The second one was 2.5 million. The assets are up over 10 million, 12 million. So yeah, it's not a little bit of money. But I will say this, in terms of our discussion: if you can't handle $100, why would God give you 1,000? And if you can't handle 1,000, why would God give you 10,000? You can't take care of 10,000, he's not going to give you 100,000. So it's basic principles that wherever you're at, and again, whoever, the pastors that we're talking to, it's not what you have, it's what you do with what you have. That is, goal number one. You've got to handle what God has entrusted to you, and you've got to handle it well before the Father can say, oh, I can trust you with more.
Well, that's an interesting concept, because pastors, and especially those in supporting roles, we're known as, facing financial challenges. The reputation precedes us, whether it's, credit cards, payment plans, or the temptation to overspend. All of these things are very real, especially for young pastors. Take us through a little bit of what it was like for young Pastor Rick, and your experience, to maybe what are some reflections you might see or sources of concerns for these challenges with our young pastors right now?
Sure. It's really interesting when you get to 35 years of ministry. People may make some observations about your finances, and then think, well, or your place in life or whatever, and they go, oh, well, it's easy for you to talk about these things. But Cheryl and I graduated and were married in 1988. I didn't say 1788, I said 1988. It's not that long ago. And there was no church. They had told us that when you go to Bible college, you graduate and bing, you're going to get a church. And that didn't happen. And so we volunteered. We had no jobs. And so our first home was Cheryl's parents' basement. Our first few meals were eaten off of a card table. And Cheryl's first meal, actually, the first meal we shared together was KD and hot dogs. And nice. You know what? Those were not bad days. Now, there wasn't a lot of money. And eventually what happened was we both had to take jobs as waiters. And so I remember, how humbling it was in the new Parkwood Gospel Temple, and district conference was happening. And so all of the pastors were there, and I'm trying to make an impression. I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying to act out on my career. And yet, because we couldn't go to conference, we had to work at Red Lobster. And so I remember very clearly all of the district people, because you could see the little name tags. Here I am waiting the tables for them while they ordered their lobsters and their steaks and their meals and everything. And me just putting the meals together and thinking to myself, as I serve all of these pastors, will I ever get there? What will that be like one day? And so I remember that being very, very difficult. And the first church actually that opened to us was in Amherstburg. They were meeting at a community center. They didn't have an awful lot of money. And so they secured me for $300 a month. I didn't say a week.
Okay. Yeah.
Month. And we worked there for $300 a month. And, I was putting in almost 20 hours a week. Wow. For that $300 a month. And it speaks to what I will get to in the future about the principle of hard work. But in those early days, it was pretty hard work.
Mm.
And so, we were still working at Red Lobster. And so we would pull double and triple shifts. So we'd work till Red Lobster, close the restaurant out. By the time you get all done, you're leaving Red Lobster at 1:30, quarter to 2 in the morning. And then you drive from Tecumseh, which anybody knows where that is, Tecumseh all the way back to Amherstburg. I'm not getting in the door until 3:30, quarter to 4. And I'm setting up chairs in the community center at 7 a.m.
Wow.
Because that was a Saturday night and we had church on Sunday. So, and again, not bragging, I'm not trying to elevate myself. I'm just trying to say that there were some pretty tough days. And when we went to Godrich, youth pastor, Godrich is a great church. Loved my time there. Both my girls were born in Godrich, and so we have some wonderful memories of being there. But when we left there, we were making $22,500. That was our yearly salary. And that was in the early 90s. Like that was, that's not years and years and years ago. And so there were some slim pickings in those early years. Cheryl worked, she worked in the bakery at the Zehrs store. She'd get up early in the morning at 4 a.m. and she'd go in to work in the bakery on the weekends or whatever we shipped. And I had to take care of the kids. Or she worked also at a painting store. We really, really had some tough, thin years there. And so and again, I'm not saying it to brag. What I'm saying is so that don't make the assumption that you're the only person who's having a hard time financially or not making, quote, enough money. It's not what you have, it's what you do with what you have, because we made ends meet. And we live within our means.
And that's that's a really interesting principle, just thinking of, young pastors, because it is tempting to think, well, if I move to that church that pays a little bit more, or if I, earn a little bit more income, or if I go to whatever, then that solves the problem. But yeah, I mean, you can speak to this, but it isn't a bigger paycheck isn't necessarily a solution to the problem.
I can tell you this, whoever you are or whatever town you're serving, and you drive around to the richest communities, you look at the Beamers, you look at the nice cars, you look at the big homes, they don't own them. Bank owns them.
It's true.
And if the economy ever turns around like we think it's going to change in a bit, there's going to be a lot of houses on the market and there's a lot of cars that are going to get repossessed, because almost everybody lives beyond their means today in Canada. In fact, the average Canadian debt per person, not per household, per person is $23,000.
Wow.
You owe 23. So that means 23 for your husband and 23 for your wife.
Wow.
That's an incredible statistic that you could be 30 years old and have $40,000 in debt, maybe 25,000 in credit cards and another 20,000 in a beat up old car that will not last longer than your payments. And then you drop a transmission or something, and now you don't know what you're going to do. And you come whining to your pastor or your lead pastor or whatever, because you can't afford it. Well, no one asked you to go to the restaurants and spend all the money on your credit cards, and no one asked you to buy a car you couldn't afford. So, I mean, it's really, really important to understand how you manage your income. Sometimes we talk about managing debt, but I think there's a management to our income and making sure that we live within that income before we get ourselves into too much trouble.
Right, because you've shared before, like it is quite common for us to spend more than we're earning. Like the statistics are crazy.
Yeah, right now the debt to service ratio right now in Canada as of 2021 is $1.71, meaning that for every dollar you earn, you're spending $1.71. Now, you don't have to be a big mathematician to know that if you are earning $1, but you're spending $1.71, that means you owe 71 cents on every dollar you earn. Add that up just in 1 year. So let's say if your salary is $40,000, it's 40,000 times 71 cents. That's what you're going in the hole every year. Now, you might think, well, I can afford that. Not over 10 to 15 years, you can't.
Right.
Because all of a sudden that 23,000, that that 46,000 as a couple, that's going to balloon really, really fast. It will balloon rapidly, and it will get out of control. It will get
And
out of control.
even as it gets out of control, that's an interesting aspect of our lives as well, because this is not the kind of thing you just, stuff in a closet and you can get away from and still operate. This finances really affect every area of your life, especially if you're in that kind of a picture, right? Where you're dealing with the creditors, or you're dealing with the debt, or you're dealing with all these payments you're trying to make. Like, that weighs on you and affects how you live. It affects your emotions, your, like, every area of your life.
Oh yeah, and what's really interesting is just touching back a bit on income versus debt. Do you know that your debt increases in proportion to your income? Meaning that people will say, well, if I just made more money, then I wouldn't get in debt. Actually, you would.
Right.
If you're making $40,000 a year, you will incur a certain amount of debt because of your out of control spending. If I were to give you a raise of $10,000, you will increase your spending in proportion to the 50 grand a year you're making, as opposed to the 40,000 a year. If I give you $60,000 a year, you leave being a youth pastor, now you're an assistant pastor, you will increase your spending in proportion to the $60,000. You will not stay within your means. Your debt will always increase in proportion with your income every time.
Yeah, and that's like a slap in the face almost. Like, that's when you think, again, oh, if I just made a little bit more, if I just had a little bit, then I'd be better. But it really comes down to that principle of living within your income.
Yeah, and it's a lack of wisdom, because it's like, no, you're not wiser when you're 40. You're not wiser when you're 50, because people that are older actually have more debt. They're not getting less debt, even though they're making more money. Like, I make a lot more money now than I did when I was 25, but it's only been discipline where I can say I owe less today than I owed then. But
Right.
again, very few pastors could be able to say that. They would say, well, I owe more now than I owed back then. And I thought I didn't have anything then. I thought I could hardly get two nickels to rub together back then. They're just in the same amount of debt, that just the ratios are higher. And you're right, it does play into the emotions.
And that's, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it'll hurt your marriage. Nothing will hurt your marriage more. People will talk about, infidelity or pornography, there's, or lack of communication. There's a lot of those things. No problem at all. I get those things will hurt your marriage. But I can promise you this, when you first get married, you're in absolute love. You love each other. You think you're going to live on love. You have some babies and you think everything's going to be wonderful. But I'll tell you this, and whoever's listening to me, I know you know this, even though you won't admit it. When you do fight, most of the time you're fighting about money. He did something she didn't approve of, or she's done something and he's going, why did you spend that? Every time.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. And even just to speak to the stereotype that we've seen, and I mean, I'm incredibly younger than you are, but like, I've seen pastors, I know, can't resist. I've seen many tales of pastors who've reached the age, whether it's the age of retirement or the age of not being able to work anymore, and they're not able to stop. They're not able to retire. They're not able to, and it's a financial reason, because we for some reason don't have diligence in the area of finances, that to say, hey, I am going to get old, I am going to get sick someday, I am going to deal with these things, and we just tend to not prepare for it.
Absolutely. And there's when you talk to my peers, there's so many that are going, no, I'm going to have to work till I'm 65, 70, 75, because I still have a mortgage on my house. I still owe too much money. And so they're not being driven by kingdom principles. They're not being driven by even the leading of the Spirit. They're being driven by the leading of their wallet. Wow. I can't retire. And so I have to keep working.
And even just thinking, I was just going to say that, thinking of how that affects the local church, we're not, again, like you just said, not being led by the Spirit, which is a foundational belief for us as Pentecostals, but not being led by the Spirit as to when it's time to let go and move on and release and get out of the way, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
But instead being stuck because, well, I don't have another option
Yeah.
of ways to make income.
Yeah, and the young bucks that are chasing at our heels, wanting the church, aren't going to be able to get it because we won't get out of the way, and we won't get out of the way not because of pride or ego. We won't get out of the way because we can't afford to get out of the way.
Wow, that is a very interesting thought to even begin. But obviously, we believe the Bible is not silent when it comes to the topic of money or finances. What do you think are some pertinent things that young pastors should know, specifically biblical principles, when it comes to finances?
Okay, so I have a few principles that I often will go over. The first is just this: it's the principle of accounting. The principle of accounting, and basically the principle of accounting says this: keep good records. Keep good records, because most people don't know where their money's going. They have no idea where their money's going. So they come to the end of the month and you'll hear people say, well, I don't make a bad salary, and my wife, she makes a pretty good salary. I don't know where it went. Well, if you don't know where it went, who does?
Wow.
So you have to have the principle of accounting says you have to have good records. You have to know what you own. You have to know what you owe. You have to know what you're earning, and if you know where it's going. So you have to have a good accounting of what are your assets, what are they worth. When you're investing in an asset, are you investing in an asset that is at least going to hold its own? So, for instance, something as simple as this: if you don't have it, when the bill comes in, you don't put it on a credit card ever. So that, and again, not everybody's going to like this, but you don't eat something and put it on a credit card. Wow. If you're going to eat something, you put it on your debit card, because then it's already gone.
Right.
You only use a credit card for an asset that you're going to have at the end of the month when the bill comes in.
That's wow.
Just as a basic principle. Now, I'm not saying that everything should go on a credit card, but I'm just saying it's the very simplest expression of that is why would you put something that you are going to owe after it's consumed and gone? You should always, always, always make sure that you still at least have it, whatever it is, when the bill comes in at the end of the month. So you know what you own, you know what your assets are, and you know what you owe. Most people have no idea. It's so easy to set up debt these days. We'll just have it as a running title. Netflix, Prime, Amazon, this monthly withdrawal, that monthly withdrawal, and you never even keep a list. How much is coming out of my account every month? Insurance, all of the automatic insurances, your gas, your heat, your hydro, all of those things. And you just know that it's coming out, but you don't know when it's coming out. You don't know when in relation to your paycheck when it's coming out. And you don't know in total what is going out. Like, if you're hearing me today, right now, whoever's listening, and you can't tell me off the top of the head, what is your take-home month and how much are you spending per month and what's the difference? And it better be a positive difference. Then you're failing at the principle of accounting. Simple as that.
Wow.
You just got to know. And if you don't know it off the top of your head, then the chances are you'll make a decision. You'll make a decision one day that'll cost you a lot of money.
Wow. So it's interesting because we've all experienced the like that free trial subscription where you're like, hey, sign up and it's a month, and then I will admit I've had it happen many times where you're like, oh, that $19.99 came out, I forgot to cancel that.
Exactly.
It's like this concept of not letting that happen.
That happened to me with Sirius XM, and I was like holding off and holding off and holding off, but I don't know, they were going to give it to you like 50 cents a month or whatever stupid thing it was for a year.
Yeah.
And I should have made an appointment on my calendar a month before to get rid of it, because there was no way I was paying that. and I got dinged a month.
Yeah.
I went, Rick, you know better. You know better. Now for me, it was only one $20 bill. But if you're not paying attention to that, you could go a year and a half, 2 years and go, I didn't even know that was coming out of my account.
Absolutely.
And that really adds up. That really
Yeah.
adds up.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's another principle. I like to talk a little bit about the principle of hard work, like earning an honest living. You know, I think sometimes, and I'm gonna, if I can say this as tenderly as I can, but there's a lot of us that think we're worth more than we really are.
Mm.
And there's a lot of us that think that we should live a lifestyle that's an expectation or a demand of societal culture, but was never described in Christ's kingdom principles. So like, I'm supposed to have a 3-bedroom home with 2 bathrooms. I should have a 2019, 2020 car. I should have a nice vacation every year. And the church should pay me enough money so that I can nicely do that. And oh, by the way, I only work 37 and a half hours a week and I don't do evenings. You know, that idea that
Yeah.
that I don't, that I'm entitled to a certain lifestyle. And I'm not saying that you should be poor. I'm not saying that you shouldn't make ends meet. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to go out on a date night and those kinds of things. But there's a principle of hard work, which is an investment and a toiling that will get you here if you put the hard work in here.
Right.
But if you don't put the hard work in here, then 10 years go by and you wonder, how come I haven't gone any further? Well, frankly, nobody wants you. Like, it's like, you're not a hard worker. You're not known for somebody who's there before the sun goes up and who's still there when the sun goes down. Like there's a hard work principle at play here, where even your heavenly Father, forget your boss, your pastor, or the board, or whoever else is watching you, your heavenly Father who goes, they know how to work. They know how to work. I can trust them with more. Because it's all about responsibility, isn't it? So I think sometimes it reminds us that if you want to rule over more and handle more, you have to show that you can work harder for it. And I think that's a good principle to remind ourselves.
For those watching who don't know, you are my pastor, and I did work for you as well. I remember a staff meeting where you, I don't know if you were, what the motivation was, but I remember it etched in my brain, this accountability. You're like, we as pastors, we serve and we're paid with the givings of people's offering to God. And so there is a responsibility there where you're like, are you confident before God? I remember you saying this, like, if you were standing before Jesus, are you confident that you worked hard enough this week, that you did enough to earn your salary and what you have? And there's that hard work and responsibility. And I like, it's probably been 5 years since that staff meeting, but it's been etched in my brain, just this idea of like, we are, financially living off of people's offering to God and their tithes and their offerings. And you're like,
exactly right.
There's a responsibility there.
We want people, remember the story of Jesus when he talked about the widow and she gave her 2 mites? You're living on those 2 mites.
Wow.
Jesus said, she's given more than all the rest. So she gave out of the abundance of her poverty. Let me say that again. She gave out of the abundance of her poverty. If you squander that, or you cheat that because you didn't work hard enough, I don't mean that I'm not talking about working yourself to the bone. I am saying that you put in a good, hard day's work to go, no, I earned this paycheck. You're robbing God. You're also robbing the widow. She gave it in good faith that you would handle and steward her money for kingdom principles. So that principle of
Mhm.
hard work is, I think, is a really significant one, because your heavenly Father wants to reward your faith, but he also wants to reward your diligence.
Wow.
He
It's
wants
good.
to bless you. He wants to bless you, but he won't bless what he can't trust.
Mm, that's good. That's
Uh,
good.
there's a principle of budgeting. And I'm sure Kevin Shepherd has gotten into that in the previous talks or whatever. And there's a million resources out there to teach you on budgeting. So I'm not going to get into any of those things. But I think it's really important that if you're married, that you have good financial goals and you stick to them. And that
Mm,
means that both of you work together on planning on how you're going to spend what you have, how you're going to work together to earn what you earn, and what you're going to save and how you're going to save it and what you're saving it for. That
mm.
as a
Yeah,
couple,
that's
you're
good.
always on the same page for what the goals are. And I
Mm,
learned that the hard way. Back when I was in Godrich, we had moved there, and we'd been in Windsor for a number of years. And so going up to Godrich, and I knew this because I lived in Meaford, I was like, okay, I don't have a really good winter coat. And, I had a very, very weak moment. We had a budget, that was all fine. But I ended up going past a men's clothing store that had a really, really sharp men's ski coat. And it was a lot of money. In fact, like, it blew the family budget. And I made the mistake of going into the store and trying it on. Satan, get behind me. I tried that coat on, and from the moment it came on, you would think it just had straps that go around me, and I couldn't take that coat off. And I remember bringing that coat home, and Cheryl looking at it going, wow, where did you get that? And I told her, I said, look, I don't have a good winter coat. I need a good winter coat. And so I bought this winter coat. And then she asked, and I told her what I spent on it. It would have been wonderful if she screamed at me, if she swore at me, if she told me off. She dropped her head and she started to cry.
mm.
I broke her heart. And I went to
Wow.
take the coat back, and she was wise enough to teach me a good lesson in humility and in honor. She went, nope, you're keeping that coat, and we'll
Wow.
do with less. And you'll wear that coat every day. Do you know
Wow.
that I kept that coat for all my years in Godrich, all my years in Tillsonburg, and I had that coat for the first 2 or 3 years in London. I had
Wow.
it for more than a decade. Every time I put the coat on, I was reminded of how I broke my wife's heart.
Wow.
And actually, in teaching on the financial series at Gateway, just in the last decade, Wayne, I think you were here. There was one of the Sundays where I actually came home and I asked for Cheryl's forgiveness because I had never apologized. And I
Wow.
had to ask her to forgive me. And I said, I should never have done it. You taught me the greatest lesson because you made me wear it. It'd
Mm,
been easier just to take it back, get my money back, and I was a bad boy and I'll never do it again.
yeah.
But I was never unwise with our money when it comes to budgeting and family expenses. I
Hmm.
never made that mistake again. Never made that
Wow.
mistake again, because I knew I can't break her heart. So there's something that's really important in making sure that you're both on the same page when it comes to how you spend your money. It's really,
Mm,
really important. Again, how you put a budget together. Look, Dave Ramsey does more stuff on budgeting. Just look it up. Look it up,
mhm,
follow his stuff. If you don't like him, there's 10 others out there. There's all kinds of great budgeting programs. Find
mhm.
something that the two of you can get on page with and follow it and stick to it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. One of the other, just on the topic of budgets, and this may be stealing one of your points, but again, I've heard you say it so many times, is the need for not just a budget, but for margins, and something between the budget and
Yeah,
the zero or whatever.
yeah,
Can you speak to that for a
yeah.
second?
So margin is the space between what I need and what I have. And so when it comes to finances, if you have too little of margin between what you need and what you have, then whenever something comes up and there's something that goes wrong, you'll cross over your margins because you don't have enough space. And it's good for your time management, good for financial management. I teach this all the time in various aspects and approaches to ministry, spiritual margin, whatever it is. You have to have enough space between what you need and what you have, so that when something goes wrong, you actually have enough margin to cover it. Now, I believe Mark Collins likes to talk all about how much money you need to have kind of in a savings account for the what ifs of life. That's a similar thing. But when you're, if you have a budget for, say, $150 or $200 a week for groceries, well, that doesn't mean you spend $199.99.
Right.
Keep some margin, because you don't know by next Thursday that either a deal comes in, it's a super special on meat, which is very expensive, or the babies need more milk, or something else comes up and you went, oh, now I've blown the budget. Well, but I only blew the budget by $20. Yeah, but if you blow the budget by $20 here and here and here and here, and gas went up, and it was a really, really cold month, and oh man, and shoot, we had to drive to grandma's, and that cost me an extra $75 in gas, because of course it's $1.65 a liter right now. All of a sudden it's like we overspent on 5 areas of our budget because we didn't have enough margin. We didn't have enough space between what we need and what we have. So I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's good. And it happens in every area. Like if you go back to, just as you were talking, I was like, man, if I could go back to college and have a little bit of a margin for studying, like, hey, I remember my wife has told me this story. She used to write papers, and she'd set artificial due dates for her papers so that they were ready like a week before they're due. Like I'm sitting down the day they're due to start typing, right? Like, whereas she was like, no, I set a due date. And then if something came up, if there was an emergency, if there was something, she had a margin to be able to push that assignment into. And it works in every area of our lives.
My weekend messages are done by Thursday at 12 noon.
Right. So that if there's something happens,
if there's a death, if something goes wrong, I've got lots of margin, because I'm already done by Thursday at 12 noon. So absolutely, it's very, very important.
One of the other things I've heard you share that I'd love to hear today is, I just call it the signs of trouble. If there's basically, we all look at our finances and we might be like, I'm in good shape, I'm in bad shape. What are some signs that it's like, if this is you, then you may be in trouble?
Sure. Okay. So I've identified 12 signs. Some I've got from other places, some I've discovered myself, but here are 12 signs that you need. If you have 2 or 3 of these, then it better be a red flag going up in your head. And the first one is this: if you can only make minimum payments on your credit cards, that should be your biggest red flag. Stop. If you can only make a minimum payment on your credit card, or something else hurts, your credit cards are way too high. You should be able to double the minimum payment. So if your minimum payment is $75, then you should be putting 150 on against that credit card. If you can't afford to do that, your credit card's too high, you need to stop spending your credit card. And the best way to help you, and I've done this dozens and dozens of times for different people at different times in different churches that I've served in. You wanna get a hold of your credit card spending? Take your credit card, go get a margarine container. Take the credit card, put it in the margarine container, and then fill the margarine container full of water. Put the cap on and put it in your freezer. Leave it there till the block of ice is frozen. The next time you want to use your credit card, you have to wait until it thaws. And that'll give you enough time to think through, do I really need to spend this?
Wow.
If you have to delay in paying your utility bills, like if you can't pay, you should never, ever, ever have to, your hydro heat taxes, like there should never be your staples. If you can't pay them the moment they come in, then that could be trouble. If you're cashing in your RSPs, if you find yourself and if you're younger in years, you might, if you don't know what an RSP is, come talk to me. You need to start you need to start with the principles of saving. I didn't even get into that, but there's the principles of saving, life insurance, wills, all of these things you need to take care of, and it's your responsibility to take care of them. And if you don't know what those things are, then you need to learn, and we can help you with that. But if you're cashing in your RSPs to cover debt, that's problematic. If you're always fighting with your spouse about money, that's problematic. If you're using overdraft, meaning you have some margin, you have some overdraft on your debit account or whatever, meaning that you're in the hole by $150 or $200, and you're waiting for your paycheck. You get paid on Tuesday, but on the Friday before that, you owe $300. And so your $1,800 that you're going to get for a paycheck, you've already going to deduct 300 of it. So you only have 15 to start your next 2-week pay period. That's a problem. You should always have at least $1. Set the goal. I will not have a negative balance in my debit account when I get paid on Tuesday. Use of consolidation loans. If there's once in your entire lifetime, I mean 80 years, that you need a consolidation loan, okay, maybe. But even then, a consolidation loan is almost always the result of poor financial management, poor stewardship. You should never, ever need to use a consolidation loan, unless, and fair enough, when something horrific happens. You know what, a spouse loses their job and the economy is tanking, interest rates are exploding. And by the way, interest rates are not exploding at a 0.5% increase. My first home, I paid 12%. Wow. 12%. I've seen my dad paid 18%. Wow. So when your generation is talking about an increase of, I don't know if we can handle 3.2. Yeah, 12.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't need consolidation loans. If you're having to cut back on essentials, this is another thing. And essentials is not your Starbucks latte. But if you find yourself going, I'm not able to fulfill a drug prescription. Not all churches have a drug plan. Or even if you do, and it's an 80-20, or a dentist, 80-20, or you need glasses, or your kids need glasses, and you can't afford an essential. Essential would be medication, eyeglasses, those kinds of things. If you can't afford essentials, then I would say that's another danger zone. If you're applying for more and more credit cards. In other words, if you're using a credit card to pay off a credit card, or you've already filled a credit card and you can't use it anymore because you've maxed it out. So instead of paying it off, you just go get yourself another credit card. It's called kiting, and it'll get you in trouble, always. I've already talked about never charging for groceries or gas or things that are consumable. You should always pay cash. Always pay cash. If you're getting phone calls, if you're getting debt consolidation phone calls, and people are going, you know what, we can help you, or we're after you, we need your money. That's not a problem. And then the last one, number 12, is if you just don't know how much you owe. Like I say, if you're listening to me right now, in your head, you can't immediately tell me, I know exactly what my take-home pay is after tax. I know exactly what I spend per month, and I know what's left over after. That's a problem. That's a problem. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. And what I love about those is they're all practical. They're all things you can look at and say, ugh, I don't know this, or I'm in this, or I've experienced this. And so it's stuff to look at. And honestly, for those watching, like the whole purpose here is not to provide guilt or shame or any sort of like you're messing up. It's have the assessment so that you can determine how to get healthy. And that's why we started by talking a little bit about, the lean years, the early years when we didn't have a lot. And, it is a process. It is about growing, but you make the decisions now that benefit your future. You said that right off the hop. It's like what you do with what you have now will affect you in the future. And so you learn the principles when you have a little bit, so that when you have a lot, God's able to trust you and you know what to do with it. And so you don't, I think often of, I really like hockey, and, players they get drafted into the NHL, they sign what's called a two-way contract. So they either play in the NHL or in the AHL. And in the NHL, they make $1 million. In the AHL, they make 250,000. Well, 250,000 is still a pretty good salary. Like, even though you're not, it's a comparison, but you're like, I listen to these podcasts and they always ask, like, what's the first thing you bought when you signed your contract? And you're like, are you sure you're thinking through long-term effects of what you're doing? And it's like, oh, now I've made it rich, I'm just going to go spend, which is exactly what happens when we get that increase. And so, Rick, thank you so much for sharing with us. And you'll see it on screen, but if you want to connect with Rick, I know you've already said, reach out to me. So his email is right there on the screen, and his Instagram, you can also follow him. wearegateway.ca is the church website. And of course, we can reach out. Rick would obviously help. And of course, Western Ontario District has other resources and things. So you're more than welcome to reach out. We encourage you because we actually care about you as leaders. We care about you being healthy. And this is an area of your life that we really feel you need to be healthy in. And so again, thanks so much, Rick, for joining us. For those of you watching, I encourage you to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, join back with us as we go through more of the topics we've talked through from Kevin's talk, of the areas that we need to evaluate in order to ensure that we are healthy leaders. I pray God's richest blessing on you. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.